Hello everybody, Nick Barnaby here from the Digby Model Railway, here to show you some easy ballasting tricks. Well, not just ballasting tricks, we're going to be doing a couple different things in this new episode. So, if I can move my stool here. Let it commence. So, I'm using an easy flex track, which isn't that flexible, as my main, you know, track. Mainly because I've got so much of it and it kind of holds up better when you're running on a flat surface that the track hasn't been glued down yet, because I want to make sure that I'm comfortable with everything before I put everything down. So um, what I'm doing here to the track, you probably can't see it that well, but you can see enough of it. um, I've put Scenic Ascents glue down, made by Woodland Scenics. And I know this sounds very blasphemous, but I'm using kitty litter as my ballast because A, the closest hobby shop is 2 hours away from here, and B, when you don't have supplies and a worldwide pandemic happens, you're going to go to the next best thing. So the next best thing for me is kitty litter. I should be able to do the entire thing in this ballast. Yes, it's clean kitty litter. I bought it at a pet shop and it actually turns out really well. I'll post a couple pictures up after the video gets uploaded just to show you guys how well it looks. Um, Half because I'm filming on my phone, the other half because I don't have any editing software on my phone to do these videos up, so until we get the proper programming, this will be how everything's filmed. Um, so we're going along when we're putting the glue down. I don't know how many of you don't really have you. If you're watching this, you must have a basic understanding about the model railway, or if not, you know pretty good about model railway. Um, so the tracks, you have a positive, you got a negative. We're working with an HO. So one side's positive, the other side's negative, and the main engine is within the actual steam engines or the diesel engines. So one side of it picks up the positive, runs it through the battery, and or not the battery, runs it through the motor, and it, you know, does its thing, moves the engine along, powers the lights, blah blah blah, and it returns it back onto the negative track, just like a light bulb, just like your lamps, just like anything, right? We're working with electricity, so, you know, electricity is just about all the same when you're taking it out of you know, getting electricity out of the wall. It's the same thing as your microwave, same thing as your toaster, positive, negative. Anywho, a little bit different actually, but I don't really care right now. Um, so when you're putting your glue down, you don't want to get it onto those rails because then you're going to break that whole complete circuit on the positive and negative for the electricity. So you want to make sure, A, it's not on the top of the rails. That way it can conduct its electricity through the motor. B, for a scenic standpoint, you don't want it on the main ties. If you get it on the main ties, oh, it's not going to look as good as it could be, right? So, just a couple things just to watch out for. If you do, however, get it on the ties or the tracks, simple cleanup, just make sure before you run your locomotive it does get cleaned up, because it can probably, it's going to cause some issues down the road, and you're not going to like those issues. Another thing we're doing today is we're going to be working with switches. And another cheap way to lay your tracks. So I'll be giving a couple examples out today. I'd like to get most of this done in this video. There's a little line here, the halfway mark for this flex track, and I'd like to get that done. So we're going to continue to talk about this. I'll show you a couple tricks with some chocks that you can turn this into this. If I don't lose everything off my desk. So I'll give you an up-close look at this. We'll get the highest we can on my lamp here. So y'all can see the detail in its finer stage. If I can just move my lamp here, that's just lovely. Okay, so essentially, dark rust down the side, in the middle, throw a little bit of light rust on there, a little bit of dust bowl dirt, and then some black there for your coal and whatnot. And I will show you how to go through that process. So, it's going to be a nice little episode here. When you're working with the easy track, let's start right from scratch, okay? So, how I do it is first I slap the glue down off to the sides, and you don't have to make this your first step. Gluing, of course, is your first step, but how I go about my gluing is not yours. Do it however you'd like to. But in this tutorial, I guess that's what we could call this, this is how I'm going to be doing this. So, spread your glue nice and evenly. And then take a nice little glob of it and plop it right down. And then we're going to take our brush and we're going to put it right between the ties. That way, when we put our ballast down, it's not just going to be in a couple places. It's going to be in where all the crevices are. It's going to be looking perfect, if you will. And of course, remember to be careful about those ties. Now, a little bit here and there is going to be okay. Just don't go silly on it and put all the ballast down on top of the ties and then having to go back in there and taking a toothpick or maybe a screwdriver and trying to get all the ballast off of the ties again. Because nobody, essentially, when you get your track down, nobody wants to go back and pick every piece of ballast that just doesn't sit properly. You know, like, it's not fun. But if you can, you know, try not to get the glue down there. And if you do, don't worry, you know, accidents do happen, and it's okay, you know, because nothing is perfect, you know, and we're working with a model, you know, that it's a working model, right? So if there's ballast, if there's a couple loose pieces of ballast on the track, that's perfectly fine. Just as long as it doesn't mess with the operations, you know. If there's If there's a couple pieces that are out of way, you know, it's fine. Don't worry about it. It's not the end of the world. Just as long as the ballast isn't covering up all of your sleepers or ties or whatever you want to call them, nothing wrong with it. It's essentially it is up to you how you want to go about doing this. But bloody hell, I'm losing a bunch of ballast, but that's okay. From a modeling standpoint, you want to get something that looks essentially how it would look in, you know, you'd want to model something that looks real and not rubbish, essentially. So, I've got one side done, and now I want to glue in the middle. So I'm coming back in with my brush that Scenic Express has generously put in with the bottle, and I'm going in right between the ties, and I'm putting nice little globs of glue down. Now this is where you're gonna have to be supremely careful, because in the end of the day you are dropping your brush down, putting between the ties, and leaving glue there. And as I said before, if you mess up, you mess up, you know? It's glue. We are talking about electronics, and just as long as those electronics get the required power, there's nothing wrong with it whatsoever, you know. But you do, like I've been saying over and over, you do want it to look real, because in the end, this is your display, your railroad, whether you're doing it to look like an LNER layout, or maybe you're doing a layout based in British Columbia, or perhaps you're doing a Union Pacific layout. You know, it's all based on where your location is, how well they keep their tracks tidied, how well, you know, there's a number of different things, really. Just a number of different things. If there's coal involved, you're going to want to put, you know, some coal on your tracks to make it look like soot and all that grimy detail. You know, you want it there, because essentially it doesn't stop with the locomotives themselves. It stops with, you know, the grime on the track that gets kicked up into the locomotive. That has to be there, you know. The dirt on the side of the engine, if it's running through, you know, dirty valley, you know, desert kind of, that grime and that dirt's going to kick up with the wind and with the passing locomotive, and it's going to settle into these crevices. And if you've got a dirty locomotive and dirty rolling stock, well, there's going to have to be dirty tracks. So that's why we've got chalk, and that's why we're trying to get that ultimate look going for the layout. So we're just about done here. I've been getting both sides, and yes, there's a bit of a mess, I know. You probably can't see it, but I'm willing to admit, I'm not perfect. And nobody on earth is absolutely perfect. That's okay. Because kind of gives a little story, I guess. So, all of the inside of the ties are complete, and all of the outside has been complete. Now we're gonna use our fingers, because that's what I'm gonna use. You don't have to use your fingers, and we're just gonna gently rub along the top of the ties to get all that glue off. So when we lay our ballast, it's not gonna stick to the ties as much. So now that we've got that, we're gonna take our ballast, and how I do it is I usually start from the middle. Don't put too much ballast on. If you're doing this whole thing, it really doesn't matter how you start up with the ballast, just as long as you got enough glue laid down that the ballast isn't gonna get in the way of you gluing it down. Push lightly along, not too hard that it kicks any ballast up that's sit down with the glue. But you don't want to go too light that's not doing anything. And again, we're going to go to the end of the glue and get that settled down to the last place where the glue is, and we're going to push just evenly along, mindful of the glue. That's what you gotta do. So now I've got a little car here, open top car for, I guess you call them hoppers, to pick up any of the leftover ballast. We're gonna just evenly spread that along the side. This is probably the quickest part of this whole process. Make sure your ties are showing underneath of it. And we're just going to gently move this just a bit, tap it a bit if you want to, like I'm doing, just so your ballast doesn't go all over your work desk. Or if you're doing this on your model, it doesn't really matter. You just want to make sure that ballast isn't going to go nowhere. Except for where it is. So we're going to gently drop it down onto the glue. The glue will pick up all of those loose ones, and we're going to want to be generous with it. Just, you want to give enough ballast that's going to stay. In place. It's going to look good. And flip this over. And this works, it's the same with the switches, Goes the same for your switches. I'll put another tutorial up about switch work. but just be very generous with it. So, we're at the end of this. Thank the maker. All of the ballast has been laid that we're doing today. Doesn't look too bad. Now I'm just gonna bring this over to the floor because everything can get swept up. It's not like it's gonna stay there forever. So, we're gonna let that set. And while we let that set, I'm gonna show you guys how I like to do my switches. So, I got this cork at the dollar store. It was like 2 pieces for around $2. And we're gonna set that right on the cork. Now when you're mixing your flux track with, you know, this type of track, you want to make sure, if I can find where my scissors went off to. You want to make sure that it's overlapped a bit, just so it can accept that little hook underneath of the flex track, right? So if I take a piece of flex track and set it underneath there, there's going to be enough room between the flex track and the cork to make sure when this gets laid, there's going to be enough room that they can be, you know, put together without much issue. So I'm taking grandma's shears here. And we're going to cut down on it. Boom. Gonna break it off where it needs to be broken to accept, again, that flux track. And it doesn't matter if there's, you know, there's that little gap there. That's not going to be there for too long. Because once that's all laid down and glued, I'm going to come in with some ballast and ballast it. So we're going to get our glue, pop the top off, and slather down some glue. Be mindful of where the switch is. So this piece that moves back and forth here, you want to be very careful that you don't get glue there, because it's going to cause a couple essentially, if you do glue that down, you're going to be causing a bit of trouble for yourself down the road. Fair warning. And you're not really going to like it that well, because then you're going to have to fix it. So we're going to be careful of that. Set that down, and then you're going to lay the track down on top of the glue. I like to apply a little bit of pressure while doing this. Also making sure that those pesky switches, when you're pressing down, you want to make sure that your switches are going to switch, because what's the point of a faulty switch on a working railway, right? There. Set that to the side and let the glue dry.